I want you to think about how many times as a child were you asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want you to think now, how did you answer that question? Maybe you said you wanted to be a firefighter. Maybe you said you wanted to be an astronaut. Or if you were anything like me, a quite ambitious child, you also said that you wanted to be a part of the SWAT team. However you answered that question, you genuinely believed that that was what you were called to do and who you were called to become. But I want you to think now if you were ever asked any of these questions. What kind of a lifestyle do you want to live? Who are the kinds of people that you want to surround yourself with? What brings you joy? And most importantly, do you know what your purpose is? You see, when we're around the age of 5, we go shopping for the very first time for a set of school supplies. Maybe you can recall getting that backpack with a matching lunchbox. You got a notebook with some cool pens that you're really excited about. But what you don't realize was also happening was that you were being placed inside of a box. And on that box is a set of rules. Go to school, get good grades. Don't question how things work. Find a job that's going to pay your bills. Don't take too many risks, and die with regret. The Single Care team did a study recently that found in 2023, children aged 12 to 15 have the highest rate of depression. And the American Journal for Managed Health, since 2008, found that young adults aged 18 to 25 had the highest increase in mental illness by 71%. Our world has changed, but the way that we are raising tiny humans has not. We are placing each one on a conveyor belt of an educational system, promising that if those rules are followed and they stay in that box, that the result will be a successful and happy life. For me, all my life I did that. I stayed in my box, I followed those rules, and I was hopeful for that promise of a happy and successful life, until everything was disrupted drastically. When I was 20 years old, I received a call that my dad had taken his life. He was said to be the least likely person to die by suicide. He was so charismatic. He seemed so successful from the outside. But when he passed, I fell into my own state of depression. I felt like everything that I knew and believed was going to lead me to that happy life was a lie, because that was what was modeled to me. I describe this time as my life as living in autopilot on one of those airport sidewalks, just kind of barely making it. It was the very first time that I really began to question that if following those rules was going to make me happy. Right as I felt like I was pulling myself out of that shock and grief, my life was hit again. When I was 23, I received a phone call that I'd also lost my older brother to suicide. I walked into this wave of grief again because the same things were said about him. We never saw it coming. He seemed like he had it all together. I spiraled down this hole of questioning that if beyond the brain chemistry of mental illness, what are commonalities that are causing this increase that we are seeing? This led me to look at the way that we are molding the beliefs of children during their educational process. Yes, you can absolutely argue that there are outside influences at play, but children and teenagers spend roughly 30 hours a week in school, so why not start there? In 2019, when I was 26 years old, I felt this deep calling and this tug that I needed to do something. I wanted to speak up and do something that I felt like was going to make a change. So I decided to start speaking. And it wasn't only just to share my story, but it was to also empower young adults, mostly high school and college age, to actually envision a life that they wanted to live, not one that they have bought into. And do you know what I found? This next generation is craving a change. I have watched countless young adults have massive breakthroughs when they're finally offered the tools to start peeling back the layers of what their purpose is. And do you know what comes next? Hope. So how does this educational system play a role in decreasing this incline? Imagine if, instead of a AP course that only leads to a fancy mark on a transcript, a course is introduced and required that focuses on 3 key elements. The first being writing a vision for your future. The second is setting healthy and concrete boundaries. And the third is mentorship. When you teach a young adult how to write a vision for their future, it's like teaching them to build a house on a solid foundation. For without a vision, a man will perish. When I introduce this exercise, anytime that I speak, I can quite literally see the wheels turning. I watch them as that for the very first time, those questions are beginning to be answered. What is that lifestyle I want to live? Who are those kind of people that I want to be around? What's bringing me joy? And the best part is when they start to see what their purpose is. But here's where it starts to get a little bit tricky. After that excitement of seeing this beautiful picture painted, the next feeling that happens is doubt. All of those outside influences start to pour in, and the thoughts happen of, how is this even going to happen? This is not realistic. And of course, the feeling of, this is really uncomfortable. This is where boundaries is going to come into play. Teaching those students and young adults how to fill the front row of their life with not only people, but communities that see and support their vision is what will make all of the difference. But how do you fill that front row? Mentorship. What better way to see if the future version of yourself is a good fit than walking in the shoes of somebody that is living it? When I got to that point in my life, that knowing I needed to start finding my purpose, I began reaching out to people that were doing and living in a way that I thought was a fit for me. But this didn't happen for me until a couple years after college. And if I'm being honest, I was desperate. So why not introduce this before high school is even over? Empowering and encouraging those students to reach out to those potential future versions of themselves is going to offer confidence and clarity when those life-altering decisions are right around the corner. A lot of the time I get feedback, especially from college students and those that have graduated, that when they get to those points of success, they look around and they think, this is it? They realize that that marathon that they just ran was not their race to run. It was not the path they were called to be on. Offering a course like this, I believe, is long overdue. Allows them to work backwards in order to move forward into the vision that they see for themselves. I'm asked all the time as a 2-time survivor of suicide loss, how do we stop suicide from happening? And I wish more than anything I had that answer. And to be honest, I don't think it's a black and white answer. But here's what I know to be true. When you focus on impacting just one person's life, it creates a ripple effect. But that ripple can only begin when they have the belief in themselves and they're clear on what their purpose is. I've seen firsthand what happens when somebody loses touch with their true authentic self. The walls of that box begin to close in, and seeing beyond them diminishes. It's now up to our educators and a system that has failed us for far too long to say enough is enough. It is time for a change. We must encourage and dig into this next generation so that they can be offered tools that has been a gap in our education for far too long. That is how that ripple will turn into a massive wave.